Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Takeaway Thursday. Today, we've got two very interesting speakers. We will start off with Mr. Thabiso Magwaza, who will be talking about responsive design for the web. Thabiso, take it away.
Hello, everyone. My name is Thabiso Magwaza, and today I'll be speaking to you guys about responsive design techniques on the web. It's going to be a short presentation, so for the outline, we're just going to have a little bit of a background, some theory, as well as some code. Probably won't have a lot of time to go through the coding part. I prioritize the theory. Yeah, I know, but yeah, it's just how it is. Anyways, so for a little bit of background, I remember in 2017 when I first started out with web development, I read this quote from the co-founder of Stack Overflow, Jeff Antwoord, who said that any application that can be written in JavaScript will eventually be written in JavaScript. Now, this was back in 2007 when he said it, and in 2017 when I read it, it had become more and more true over time. So I sort of tweaked it to my own understanding to mean that anything that can run in the browser will eventually be run in the browser. And to actually prove that point, I have this entire presentation running in the browser as we speak. I used a library called Reveal.js to actually create the application. You can see I'm running it on my local host. Wrote a bit of CSS and all of that to get it running here. So yeah, even PowerPoint can run in the browser now. And I also used it to make this animation here, where this animation is actually just how I envision the tech space as we speak now. I sort of see it as this world where you have these browser technologies improving, you have the cloud, you have 5G coming up, and all of it is just on a collision course where it'll create this huge ecosystem of web applications that literally run anyway. So it makes it very important now that all of the applications that we write for the browser are responsive. Because in this day and age, you just don't know who is going to be viewing your application and from what device. So this presentation is just to give us a little bit of a starting ground for responsive web design. So you see the crux of it, the pillars of web design. I'm just going to speak about the ones that I personally have been in contact with. So the first one is responsive units. Secondly, responsive images. A third, I'll talk about fluid layouts, and then of course, media queries. So in terms of relative units, I think in order to understand relative units, we first need to understand a little bit about CSS's value passing procedure. So whenever you declare a value in CSS, it goes through a couple of steps before it's actually rendered onto your browser. You have what you call a declared value, which is the value that you actually put on your CSS. Now that is then cascaded. So CSS will use its cascading rules to pick one of the values that you define. So if you sort of define the same value for in multiple styles, then it will pick one using its cascading rules. And then you have what you call a specified value, which is the value that CSS gives to your properties if you don't specify anything. So for example, the padding here is 0 because you didn't specify the padding. Then you have your computed value, which is when your cascaded and your specified values, if they are defined in relative units, are converted back into pixels. You have your so-called use values, because these computed values can sometimes be too specific. Like for example, this 188.4, 184.8 is rounded up to 185, which brings us to your actual value, which is the value that is rendered by your browser for whatever thing that you're using. So the most important part here is just these relative units here, like the rem, to say that they are actually converted back into pixels before they are rendered in the browser, depending on what it's relative to. So if you look here, the rem is relative to the root font size, which is 16 pixels. So you times 1.5 by 16, you get 24 pixels, which is what is rendered on your screen. Now there's a couple of relative units to choose from in CSS. You have the M, which is relative to the font size of the current element, and the rem, which I like a lot, which is relative to the root font size, view width, view height, and just a myriad of them. So it's important to use these instead of the absolute pixel values so that your design is a bit more responsive. And then you have responsive images. So the idea of responsive images is to serve the right image to the right device and to that device that has the right screen size, right? So this avoids you downloading unnecessary large images, especially on these smaller devices. So responsive images normally involves things like pixel switching, density switching, and art direction. So with pixel switching, you would serve the same image in a different resolution depending on the dimensions of the device. Density switching, you'd serve the same image in a different resolution depending on the device's pixel density. And then art direction, you'd save an entirely different image depending on whatever factors that you want to consider, whether it's the dimensions or the pixel density. So I don't really demo much of this, but I do have some links here to check out and read more about it. And then fluid layouts. Fluid layouts, I think in this day and age, mostly just involves using the modern browser features such as Flexbox and CSS Grid. I think those are hella important. You could still be using things like floats, margin autos and all of that. But yeah, I think you'd get away with Flexbox and CSS Grid very well. And then you have media queries. So with media queries, what you normally want to do first is to decide whether you're going desktop first or mobile first. And then from there, the difference between desktop first and mobile first is that in desktop first, you have your CSS written for your desktop, and then you use media queries to shrink your design to fit into a mobile screen. And then for mobile first, you will have your CSS written for the mobile, and then you'll use your media queries to sort of expand your design to fit the desktop screens and the other screens that you can use. So just for some coding, the way that I'm going to show the code here is in terms of a case study. So I've already written this project. A lot of my fellow grads will be familiar with it. So I'm just going to be going over it and sort of showing where I used some of these techniques in that particular project. We're going to start off with relative units. So what I found with responsive design is that, and using relative units, is that it's very important to set yourself up for success from the beginning. So a technique that I learned is to use the rem in most places in my web application, so that because the rem is relative to this one particular value here, which is the root font size. So if you can set this root font size and make everything in your website in rem, then by changing this one property, you can actually change the look and feel of the entire site. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back to the browser here, and then I want to show you guys exactly what I mean in terms of a case study, or in terms of this project that we built. I'm just going to pull up the developer tools here, and then I'm going to find this particular root font size. Don't worry about the percentages for now. I'll explain that later. But if you look here, as I am shifting down this font size, the entire site is actually getting smaller. And if I'm, say, sort of designing for a bigger screen, I can play around with this one value and the entire site is getting bigger. So that is, I think, the power of this technique, where you can have just one property that you can change that can change the entire look and feel of your site. The next relative units that I want to talk about is this one here, this M. So this one is to do, I use, is to do on the media queries. So I use the M for the media queries instead of normal pixels, because this one is relative to the browser's root font size. So if I were to change my browser's root font size, my media query breakpoints would actually change accordingly as well. So you don't want your media queries to break the moment someone changes their browser font size. I was gonna change the browser font size, but I realized I'm running out of time, so I'm not gonna do that. I'm just gonna move on to the next part, which is responsive images. So I didn't like do that whole pixel switching and density switching here. You can read more about it on those links that I sent. But I did use relative units for responsive images as well. I didn't define any of the sizes of the images in pixels. I use view width and view heights to define the images so that they are also responsive. Another point I would like to speak about is fluid layouts. Now, in order to demo fluid layouts, I'm gonna have us look at this nav bar here. And it's important to use fluid layouts because one thing I found about fluid layouts is that it's very easy to change between like CSS grid and Flexbox, depending on what you want. So actually using these modern browser features allows you to achieve a fluid layout much better. So I just want you to pay attention to this one part here, this display flex, and that is how this entire nav bar is being displayed right now. But as I decrease, I got to a point where in this particular viewport width, I found it more appropriate to use a grid rather than a Flexbox. So you see how easy it is to change from being a flex to being a grid. Well, to being a grid. So I think these modern browser features will definitely allow you to achieve these fluid layouts better. One of the other things that I can show you is these cards here. If you look at these cards, these are all done with CSS Grid. And funny enough, there's no media queries to do this. You just use, I think it's something called AutoFit. So I used AutoFit to create this sort of two-dimensional layout here. So you see it's fully responsive without any media queries. So definitely, guys, check out CSS Grid, check out this thing here. What is it? CSS Grid, check out Flexbox. And I often hear people talking about which one you should use. I think you should use both. And like you saw here, they are very, very powerful if you use them in conjunction with each other. The last thing I'd like to speak about is media queries. Of course, you saw me putting down those media queries here. So these are just your last line of responsive design where you change some particular attribute about the page depending on what screen size you're on. So if you look here, these are desktop first media queries. You can see that I'm using the max width. If they were mobile first, I'd be using the min width property. I'm not going to explain too much about the theory of that because this talk is so short. So anyways, I think that brings me to the end of my talk. I'd like to just give a big shout out to this man, Jonas Schmidtman. He has an amazing course on advanced CSS and SAS on Udemy. So if you're interested in some of these techniques, he really goes into depth and formats them in a really nice way. So you can really check it out on Udemy. The best $100 that I've ever spent in my life was on this course. Thank you very much, guys. This is the end of the talk. And yeah,